And I think it's okay. We're on.
Cool. Thanks, Alexei. So, hi, everyone. Welcome. A lot of people. Hold on. Let me just.
Don't worry, I'll accept everyone.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Hi. Hey, everyone. Welcome to our event tonight. My name is Clyde. On behalf of product people, warm welcome. Thanks for joining us. Just a short introduction to product people. We are a Berlin-based product management consultancy, and we offer three general types of services. Our most common sort of practice is with clients as interim product managers for a short amount of time, something like 6 months, where we go in and are kind of an embedded product manager within a team. Second is to do product profitability analyses and offer advisory services. And sort of the last piece is, a remote product management coaching and sort of knowledge sharing. But enough about us. You guys are all here to hear Sadie speak. So it's a short introduction. Sadie is the lead product manager for AI product at Tier Mobility, and she is here today to speak with us about applying a product mindset to AI. So what will happen is Sadie will present, and then once she's done, we'll have a short or long, depending on how many questions you guys have, Q&A session. And then after that, we will stop the live stream and do some, informal networking if there's enough people and time and interest. So without further ado, Sadie, you can take it away. I will unshare my screen. You can go ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Clyde. And thanks to product people for having me tonight. Can you see my screen?
All good?
Cool. So as Clyde said, I am the product person for AI at Tier Mobility. And tonight I'm going to tell you how I approach some of the challenges of building products with AI. AI is for everyone. So I hope that there are people in the audience who already work with data science and machine learning and AI. And I hope that there are people who don't yet, because it's part of my vision that everyone has the ability to use AI to create better and smarter products. So I see a world where it's not just AI experts, but where all of us, especially product people, have the toolbox that we need to use AI. Just quickly before we begin, I'm going to use the terms data science, machine learning, and AI throughout the talk. What's the difference? What is AI actually? To me, machine learning and data science are about generating knowledge and insights, and AI is what happens when we use that knowledge to mimic human behavior, to automate decision making. And it's not super relevant because most of what I'm going to talk about applies to all three of those things. So AI is for everyone, but it's hard. I'm a data person at heart. I love using numbers to make my case. So spoiler alert, number coming up. 80% of data science projects never make it to production. So you look at this, you take it at face value. This is quite a staggering statistic. That's a lot of time and money put into something that doesn't bring value. But if I'm honest, I can't in good conscience really call this a fact. It's more of a rumor, something that's floating around out there on the internet, but also something that I've heard from people that I work with, even from my team, kind of like a hint, what are you going to do about this kind of thing? So at the very least, if we look at this, I think it's an indication that there are frustrated people out there, teams, stakeholders, management. And this tells me that we as an industry still have a lot to learn about building products with AI. And now I'm going to get personal. I haven't run the numbers on the projects that I've actually worked on, but I definitely feel this pain. Things are slow, expectations aren't aligned, people are frustrated. And for a while, I thought it was just me who hadn't figured out how to AI yet. It couldn't be a coincidence that sort of everywhere I went, I ran into the same challenges. But eventually I accepted these challenges as part of the job and not part of me. And that's helped me face them head on and start kind of refining and developing my own playbook and vision for AI product development. And it all pretty much comes down to one thing. So I think that we will build better and smarter products if we all anticipate the challenges of working with AI. So if AI know-how is integrated throughout the organization, I think we'll also be in less pain if we do this. What I don't mean is that we need technical AI expertise everywhere. What we need is an understanding of the challenges we will face and strategies for overcoming them. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the rest of this talk. AI is for everyone and it can be everywhere. If you haven't already worked with AI in your products, you might have to, or even better, want to soon. And my goal today is to show you how we can all contribute to harnessing the power of AI, whether we're AI experts in a centralized team or domain experts wanting to make our products smarter with AI. So where are we going today? We'll start with a bumpy ride, talking about some of what makes AI product development different from traditional product development and the challenges that I've personally experienced at Tier. Then we'll talk about what might work, so strategies that we're trying to get into a faster, smoother lane. And finally, I'll wrap up by talking about where we are today. I don't want to ruin it to you, but I'm going to be honest, we're not there yet. And I do hope that you will stick around for questions and discussion because I'm also really interested to hear about your experiences and what has maybe worked and not worked for you. So let's get started. Welcome to the bumpy ride. My ride at Tier started a bit less than 2 years ago when I joined as a PM. And in case you don't know Tier, we are a micromobility company founded in 2018 with our headquarters here in Berlin. We're on a mission to change mobility for good by reducing car traffic through sustainable alternatives. And if there are any scooter haters in the audience, scooters are just the beginning. Some numbers. Right now, we're in over 85 cities in 10 countries. We have over 65,000 vehicles, around 900 employees, and since we started, we've generated more than 30 million rides. What about me? I come from a data background. I've been working in data and data science for about 5 years now. And pretty quickly on, I noticed that the product mindset was often missing in data projects and that this resulted in those projects not bringing a lot of value. So I made it my mission to try to bridge that gap. And I became a product person who works with data powered or data heavy products. So naturally, when I started at Tier, I was given the task of leading a team with one data scientist and one engineer, and we would do something with data science. It was even hard at this point for my manager to describe exactly what we would be doing. I still remember when we sat down and he told me that our job was to solve non-deterministic problems. I was like, yeah, okay, I'm on it. And I ran back to my desk and Googled non-deterministic. It's not really important for the talk, but in case you're not familiar with that term, like basically what he was saying is that we would be solving problems that rule-based systems couldn't solve. So with this kind of vague team mission, I went out to find some non-deterministic problems. In my previous job, I was more used to problems coming to me, not necessarily having to go out and find them. So this was already a bit challenging. But anyway, like any good new employee trying to prove herself, I set up meetings with all the top guys and I gathered a bunch of hard problems. What kinds of hard problems are there in the micromobility space? At the time, the biggest things people were talking about were GPS accuracy. So you know from experience, if you've ever tried to use a micromobility vehicle, it might not be actually exactly where it looks like it is on your phone. Things like fraud prevention, just because of the payment flow in micromobility, lost scooters and vandalism, and fleet allocation. So like where are the best places to put the vehicles so that they will actually get ridden. But what makes this part even harder is that when you go out problem fishing, you tend to end up with hard problems, but not necessarily problems that you should solve with AI. So it's a very real question of whether a simple solution might do most of the job. And if not, whether you should really be building it yourself or buying an existing one. And I can't stress enough that this is an important question. I won't get into it in this talk, but maybe there will have to be another talk in the future about tackling those things. But let's just say I thought things through and I had my problems. Enter the first challenge. I need to figure out if we can actually solve the problem. So the main difference between AI, machine learning, and data science compared to traditional product development is the level of uncertainty. This makes it really hard to plan and to manage expectations. What do I mean by this? There's obviously uncertainty in traditional product development. We don't know if the solution or the feature will solve a user's problem. Will the user understand this? Will they do what we want them to do? And this is why we do things like discovery and A/B testing and user testing. If you're building a product based on AI, not only do you have this product uncertainty, but you also have uncertainty about your data and models and algorithms. Do we have the data? How is the quality of that data? Can we build a model to predict what we want to predict? Is the thing actually predictable? Which model will work? And how do we know when it's good enough? Like, what is good enough in this context? So let's take an example from micromobility. Scooter riders are not allowed to ride on the sidewalk, the pedestrian area. Let's say that we want to understand when they are riding on the sidewalk and nudge them to return to the street. So try to influence their behavior. The first if is whether, given the sensors we have, the data that we can get our hands on, can we predict accurately enough that they are on a sidewalk instead of on a street? And the second if is whether we can change their behavior once we know that. So we need to know the answer to both of these ifs before we know whether we can solve the problem. We'll come back to handle this. We'll come back to talk about handling uncertainty in the next part of the talk, but for the moment, back to me. In the face of all this uncertainty, I take the problems I've gathered and I let my team, have a go at them. The go turns into a very long go. There's a lot of exploration, a lot of questions. And if that wasn't enough, while this is all happening, I start to notice something else, which is who's actually going to use this model if we build it. So we were kind of in an ivory tower, whether by choice or not, cut off from the domains where the problems we were solving were. At this time, there were product teams solving operational problems, product teams solving customer problems, and product teams solving hardware and IoT problems. We could contribute to any of these domains, but we weren't an end-to-end team, so we would need buy-in and resources to even try things out. And we would need a lot of domain knowledge to actually build something that works. And this is a startup. Everyone's so busy. Who has time to work on a problem coming in from the side from another team when, for example, we're getting ready to launch mopeds for the first time? So there's no guarantee that your AI will be valuable or even used at all if it's coming from this ivory tower. So there I was, two big challenges, uncertainty and separation from the domain. There's a team looking to me for direction and a company looking to me for answers. What's a girl to do? Or anyone who's in this situation, of course. I'm not gonna lie, there were plenty of times when I wanted to just run away, but I stuck with it and I tried some things out, and that's what I want to share with you in the next part of the talk, because I hope that this will help you when you're considering building data science or AI into your product. How do we get to the faster lane? We're going to revisit those two challenges I mentioned, and I'll share some strategies for making AI work for your product. Going back to the world of uncertainty. So you found a problem that's worth solving, but remember, there's still a lot you don't know. Your team likely doesn't know whether they can solve the problem, let alone how long it will take until they dig into the data and build some models. But it's time for them to get to work. So watch out, because at this point, it's easy to fall into the trap of analysis paralysis or to get stuck in a local optimum. Answering all these questions can drag on and on. You keep finding new questions, you keep wanting to try out new models that might just be a little better from what you did before. And you can spend pretty much forever on a data science problem, but it doesn't mean that the time you spend is proportional to the value that you bring by working on that. So you might miss out on other opportunities if you spend too long stuck in a local optimum. What might work? Plan to learn along the way, not to get it right the first time. So I'm no longer trying to eliminate uncertainty before committing to working on something. Instead, I'm investing a set amount of time, a number of weeks, that I'm willing to devote to an idea before reevaluating it in the context of other opportunities that might be on the table. This is an idea inspired by Basecamp, by the way. If you want to read more about it, read Shape Up. There's a lot in there. It doesn't have to do with, it's not specific to data science and machine learning, but I think a lot of the concepts really apply in this case. So yeah, you set an amount of time that you're willing to commit to a problem. And the key for me here is that at the end of that time period, you put the idea back on the table with your other ideas and use what the team has delivered or what they've learned to decide whether it's worth it to commit additional time. This could look like saying that after 4 weeks, this fraud prediction model we were working on doesn't look very promising, so we're moving on. Or it does look promising, but we didn't solve the problem in 4 weeks, so we're going to give it another 4 weeks. It's a more deliberate approach than just saying, but we just need a little more time to make this better. I think it's really easy to always say, we just need a little more time to make this better. It's much harder to force yourself to make the decision, is it worth it to spend more time on this? Another way to learn along the way is to ship before you're ready. A lot of times you don't know if data science works until you try it. It's experimental. So this could look like putting a super simple heuristic model into production, into an end-to-end product, which might make everyone cringe. I mean, it's made me cringe in the past, but it's crucial for learning. Not only do you learn how your models will work in the real world, which for those of you who work with data science, you probably know that can be very different than how they work in your Jupyter notebook. But you might also then get the chance to see where business processes or user experience needs to change to benefit from this AI. It's not a given that you just plug it in and things will work out. You also, of course, if you do this, you also get a baseline, which is super important. And who knows, maybe you even find out that that super simple model gets you 90% of the way there and you can move on to something else. Time for some real talk. I still haven't told you how to manage stakeholder expectations in the face of all of this uncertainty. And I'm still figuring this out, but I have a couple of thoughts. I think you need to develop some amount of intuition about whether something's going to work and what roadblocks might come up or where there will be slow spots. If you haven't developed that, then talk to people who have. Talk to people who have solved similar problems or people who might know, and that's how you'll learn. Also, take people along, stakeholders, other teams you're working with, on the journey so they can start to develop that intuition too. I would love to hear what you've tried. Feel free to pop it in the chat now, or we can also discuss more later. Okay, so you've got your problem. You've figured out some ways to handle uncertainty. Maybe you've given yourself 4 weeks, you're on track. But watch out, don't assume if you build it, they will come. And don't expect it to work even if they do come. Don't expect it to work out of the box, even if they do come. What do I mean here? So we built a system that determines in real time how many scooters we need in each area of a city. That's great, but obviously it's not going to do anything unless someone actually goes out and puts the scooters in those locations. And they can't do that just by looking at the output of our algorithm or even by looking at a nice map that we might make with that output. They need specific, easy to understand instructions delivered to them at the right time. And maybe no one has time to do that because they haven't planned it into their delivery coming up. What we actually tried out with the system I just mentioned is that we wanted to use users. So we wanted to incentivize users to park in different places based on the output of our algorithms. We already had an incentivized parking feature built by another product team. And so we just thought, okay, since no one has time to sort of build a product around this algorithm right now, let's just kind of glue these pieces together and hope that it works. It didn't work, no surprise there. In this case, I mean, this is a good example because incentivizing people to park in predictable locations that are maybe always there every time they open up their app is very different from trying to incentivize people in locations that might change frequently based on supply and demand in a city. So in this case, this is a good example of why you might need to take the capabilities or the weaknesses of a model into account when you're thinking about UX, and the other way around as well. You might need to think about like what's possible for the users as you are building that model and making decisions about the model. So there's no guarantee that your AI solution will be valuable or used at all when it comes from the ivory tower. And as an AI team, you often have to do a lot of proving to make the case that it's worth building a product around a model. And it's really hard to do that when you can't experiment end to end, when all you have is that model on your own. So what might work? Domain-oriented ownership of AI projects. So I believe that it's not about bridging the gap between your AI teams and your product teams, but it's actually about eliminating this. Only then will we be able to design solutions that work, to manage these dependencies and expectations, and keep our people, everyone, investing in projects that actually bring value. For AI teams, this could look like getting to know the domain. It sounds really obvious, but honestly, you do have to often go out of your way to do that. Get to know the business domain and the tech in that domain as well, and move in if you can. You'll come up with better solutions if you have access to the knowledge in that domain. For product teams, own your AI. Involve AI early on in discovery at the beginning so you can plan for potential future intelligence, even if you're not ready yet. And understand what's possible with AI in your domain so you can plan for the future. You're the experts in your domain, so you can come up with the better ideas, but make sure that you can put AI solutions on the table when you're considering those ideas. And then deliver together too. There will be things that an AI team will work on that won't bring value until you adapt your product, like the parking example I mentioned before. Time for some more real talk. What does this look like in practice? It's hard. Data scientists, as we know, might not work on the same cadence as other engineering teams. And I think this also really depends on the size and the maturity of your organization. If you have 1 or 2 data scientists, you don't want to just stick them in a domain or a product team, especially if you're trying to stay true to your word of pivoting and putting other opportunities on the table after you've given time to something. But I think it's worth trying. And there are probably some low-hanging fruits like ideating together or pairing. This might only get you a little bit of the way there. I want to try having data science in our product teams, or even having an AI team in a particular product domain. I would love to hear what has worked and hasn't worked for you as well. All right, time to wrap things up. So remember where I was after 6 months at Tier. I was in an ivory tower in the middle of a sea of uncertainty, no boat in sight to connect me with the mainland. And now, are we there yet? No, but we have a destination. I've tried a lot of things since then, which has helped me figure out where the pain is coming from and what's important in making AI work for us. And I'm convinced that it comes down to 2 key things that have to do with how we approach problems and who owns those problems. So as teams working with AI, we need to work with uncertainty instead of trying to eliminate it. This is with time boxing and pivoting and teaching the other people that we're working with how AI works. And we need to rethink our setup of data teams. So I think we need to catch up with the rest of the technology world who have already been preaching a domain-driven approach for a while now. What does this mean for me in the next year? I'm on a mission to find the right problems for AI at Tier. I'm also committed to embracing the pivot, and I'm going to experiment with bringing AI to our domains, because AI is for everyone. Thanks. That's it. Well, one more thing. I would love your feedback. So if you could right now just take out your phone and scan this QR code and answer 2 questions, that would really help me make my talks better for future audiences. I can also post a link in the chat that will take you to the form. And stay in touch. You can obviously find me on LinkedIn. Would love to continue discussing some of these topics. And I'm also on Substack writing about mobility and women's issues and other random news. Actually, the next issue that we have will be about AI. So check it out, womenoftier.substack.com. And I'll put these links in the chat as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sadie. Really interesting. Also, definitely get the feeling that this is like just scratching the surface, right? So I imagine lots of people have lots of questions. Yeah, so we will basically open it up for a Q&A. Anyone who is in Zoom, if you feel brave enough, then please just shout out your question. That's fine. Otherwise, you can put it in the chat. And if you're if you're coming to us from YouTube or somewhere else, feel free to type in your questions, and I'll try to make sure we go through it in the order that they were received. So yes, the floor is open. Let me see. It looks like we actually had a couple from YouTube.
I have a quick question. Maybe I can speak up if that's okay. Thank you, Sadie, for a great presentation. Just a quick question. How did you deploy these models, and what was the post-assessment to check how successful your model is, right? Was it an A/B test, or what sort of post-assessment have you done?
Yeah, there's a couple of layers here. So I'll address the assessment part of the question first. Obviously, we have metrics that are related to the model itself. And this is actually something that we're working on right now, making those metrics more visible so that the team, the data scientists, can actually see better where to improve the models. So we have standard machine learning types of metrics. And then we have whatever business metric is related to the problem that we're trying to solve. So that's something that absolutely has to come from the domain. So if we're trying to solve an operational problem of, where should we allocate the fleet, then we need to look at the types of metrics that operations is looking at, whether that's something like how soon is the vehicle rented after we move it to a new location, or how much revenue does it generate in the next 24 hours, or how far are we away from customers who open our app.
I think one of the hardest challenges, especially working in data science related topics, is the noise, right? How do you attribute the success of your model? Or is it due to a demand campaign? Is it due to a surge in supply, or something else? So I was just a little bit curious to know what you guys do, or how do you guys counteract these noise in the data?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't have a I don't know, fancy system that does that for us. There are different techniques. Obviously, you can, we have the situation where we operate in different cities, right? So we can try to find 2 cities that are somewhat similar, and we can try to do something in one city and not in the other city and see what happens. We can also, of course, have something turned off and turn it on again, and then see what happens after that. But in our case, that's super tricky because of things like seasonality. And obviously this past year was a huge mess with COVID. Like, how can we evaluate anything under those circumstances? I think in the future, I would like to get us to a point where we're able to A/B test our models, just in the sense of, being able to use one model for one group of users, or for half of operations or something like that, and try to get a bit clearer picture there, because otherwise, you're right, it's noisy and it's hard.
Yeah, no, just advice. I think the interconnectedness of the system is super hard, and sometimes doing conventional A/B tests where it's front end facing is much easier. So what we do is what's called time slicing or switchback. So you have one day where you adopt your model, and then the next or a few hours. That might be also interesting for you guys to look into. Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. That's yeah.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks for the question. We've got something from YouTube. So it's actually during your talk, Sadie. Not sure if it's connected to a particular part though. Any insight that you can lend to approaching things when patient care quality or safety is a concern, for example, in healthcare applications?
So I'm not sure I quite understand this. Maybe specifically these topics related to AI and data science. Maybe like, is it different based on, do you approach things differently depending on the types of problems you're solving? Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. I wanted to kind of, it's a super vague question, which I can certainly appreciate, but I just wanted to have you maybe, think out loud as a product person, applying some of these principles to patient care applications, where you really have to be very careful about, if you're A/B testing something, ramping very carefully, keeping a very close eye on things. And after I asked it, I was kind of like, well, I guess all the same best practices might really apply, with maybe a little bit more manual oversight, somebody keeping a close eye. But if you or anybody else might have some tips or tricks in applying AI to healthcare applications, it'd be great.
Yeah, so I don't have anything specific for that use case. I've worked in industries where it's not so risky. We have some of the problems we might end up solving, in micromobility, there's a lot of safety issues. We might end up in this situation also where we can't just test something out on the street to see how it works. I think you just have to take that into account when you're thinking about this uncertainty, right? That makes even more uncertainty. It also changes it has to change your definition of what an MVP is, or whatever you want to call the first thing that you put out there. And I think that's also, again, about getting people on the same page as you and helping them understand that this is different from what you might read about, where you can just try something out quickly. So yeah, it's no magic bullet answer there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also enjoyed hearing about breaking down the gaps between your AI teams and your product teams, and bringing them up to speed on the domain itself. So that was helpful.
So, if I may just add actually a point out here, and we do some work with mission critical applications which are more related to what a policing system or the fire officers might use. And in our case, typically we don't do the typical A/B tests. It's a very controlled measure of tests that we do. And so, for example, if we have to roll out a new version of the application, it's a very, very controlled introduction where you may have just, out of 100 police officers, you really have 5 police officers at the Winter Games who are actually running it. And we also have, we at that point of time need to closely monitor these personnel. So we always end up having actually some personnel from our side who are accompanying these officers, because the cost of failure is too great. So in that case, our sample size, our sample set is much, much smaller. And we typically rely on a lot of qualitative feedback instead of just quantitative, because like you said, sometimes your gut feel, your intuition also, gives you some leads. So we rely a lot on even qualitative feedback. So the first feedback that we receive, which is qualitative feedback, that typically ends up, being very, very, helpful in terms of changing our models to say, okay, let's change it now, and maybe let's look at the quantitative feedback over a duration of time. So that's typically how we end up actually looking at some of our models. I don't know if it helps, but that's really something that we do in a more critical space.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of affirming
of
what I was thinking. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. Sadie, just wanted to let you know, since you can't see this, there's quite a lot of applause emojis coming through from YouTube. So your talk was very appreciated.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Another question from YouTube. What do you think, a little bit more general side, what do you think are the major differences between your role as an AI product manager versus other PM roles?
Yeah, so I think the main difference is this, how do you deal with this uncertainty and the types of activities that you might do to eliminate that uncertainty. But it's, yeah, so it's about, you know, working with people who might not work with that uncertainty. So communicating that things are different and bringing them along on the journey, as I mentioned. And then it's also about, or so far for me, it's been a lot about getting involved in the different domains of the business, right? So if you're a PM for a more traditional product, then you probably know your domain really well. What I've found is that if we want to really find the best opportunities for AI in our business, then I need to get to know a lot of domains. The better I know them, the better I'm going to be able to find the right problems. And that's why I think it's also really important that we, extend this knowledge and understanding to other people, because I think that other people know the domains better, and they will, if we're working together on that, then we'll have a better chance of finding the opportunities. So that's one of the biggest things. I spend a lot of time split between my team of data scientists and engineers and other teams who are solving domain related problems.
Actually, as a kind of a follow-up to that, how do you prioritize what your team works on, given the massive uncertainty of actually how long it'll take for you to potentially maybe solve a problem?
Yeah, again, that's about, so it's partly prioritization, but partly time boxing. I really like the term that Basecamp uses when they talk about this, an appetite. So like, what is my appetite, or what is our appetite, whoever is making the decisions about what to focus on, what's our appetite for a problem? And I mean, if you have multiple problems on the table, then you have some measures of figuring out how valuable they're going to be, or hopefully you do. Hopefully you have people asking for problems who are coming to you saying, I want to have this impact, and it's going to affect 75% of cities or 80% of all vehicles. That helps you to prioritize. But the other thing, realistically, the other thing that I have to take into account is there another team there who is going to work with us, or who's going to build the rest of this product? Because if we put our time into this, it might not get used. So I do have to make these prioritization decisions, not necessarily based on what I think is going to be most valuable, but also what I think is most likely to actually get into production.
Okay, that's interesting. Cool. How do you demonstrate value on the success of projects?
So I think this is a bit similar to one of the earlier questions. You have to look at the business metrics. So I think you shouldn't start a project until you have those business metrics in mind. It's not until you know what you want to actually influence. We can build a model and we can check the accuracy and have really high accuracy, but it still might not be doing the thing that is needed to solve the business problem. So you have those. I'm not sure if this question was about, what metrics or how you actually measure those, which we also touched on a bit before. So I think unless there's nothing more specific, I'll leave it at that.
Raul, was there a specific angle to your question, or did that cover it?
Yeah, I think it was covered. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Question from Ben, in terms of team size, how do you manage the right ratio split between data scientist, product, and software engineering?
So do you mean in the ivory tower? So in the world where it's just a data science AI team, or in a cross-functional domain-oriented approach?
I would say, hi Sadie, thanks for your presentation. It's very interesting. So I would say sort of in the general scope, because I guess you're working in sort of an ivory tower, but when you start tackling certain projects or actually building products, there's this asynchronicity between the work that the data scientists do and when the engineers sort of are able to implement these things. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you manage that ratio.
So how to manage the asynchronicity, or the number of people?
Yeah, kind of. So I think they flow well. Okay, maybe there's two questions. So how do you manage the asynchronicity, and what do you think is then a good balance between these people? Because I think it depends project to project.
Yeah, exactly. It does. So there's your answer right there. I mean, so managing the asynchronicity is partly dictated, at least in my experience, is partly dictated to me based on what other teams are working on. So if another team, like if a product team says we don't have time right now to build this, then okay, then we can work asynchronously on our models and wait until the moment when they have time to pull things in from us. In terms of the number of people who are working on a project, we haven't tried this in a fully cross-functional approach yet, but I want to, and I imagine that we keep it then very small. So I imagine that the first thing we try is just one data scientist and maybe one engineer who has experience putting models into production, but who is maybe also experienced working with APIs. I imagine that we start small, and those two people maybe join the domain and work with the full product team. And at the same time, we probably have things in the ivory tower that are more like platform services. So we might have things that either from the ops side, so the ML ops side, those things will be used across the company. So those things do belong in a centralized unit. So I think you just take the people who you need for that specific problem to work with the domain together. You might even end up having a model or a machine learning platform service. So we had this idea, for example, we were predicting supply and demand of vehicles. We had this idea that this could be a platform service. Multiple other product teams could use supply and demand for different reasons. That hasn't come to fruition yet. It might, but I think it's probably worth it to start with a specific use case and work together on that specific use case with the product team. Then later you can extract it out if it's generalizable and if it's a platform service that you need at that point. Yeah,
understood. I think that's a great answer. The challenge, I think, with this asynchronicity of putting data scientists within the domain is that there's always going to be moments where the product will be working on other things, and then that sort of domain knowledge the domain doesn't require data science at that particular moment. So I think you need some sort of scale of that team in order to make it work.
Yeah. So one thing that the way we work at Tier, we work in 6 to 8 week delivery cycles. So the whole product technology organization works with these synced starts, which I think gives us a bit of an easier way to try this out, to say, like, for this cycle, for these 8 weeks, the data scientists are going to work with the product team, and then we can reevaluate after that. Are they needed? Are they not needed? But I also think that it's about, so for me, when I say domain, I don't necessarily just mean one team. And again, this really depends on your organization. But if you have a domain with multiple teams that are working on multiple problems, it's very likely that you can find use cases for AI in that whole domain space, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that your data scientists in the domain will always be working with the same team. Maybe they get to know the domain, they can solve multiple problems in there by working with multiple teams. So again, then it's about balancing as you said, like when there's maybe not a problem to be solved in one team, there's probably another problem to be solved somewhere else.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool. Hassan would like to know what attributes to nurture for success in an AI-based company. He's just applied to an AI-based HR tech company and would be helpful for him and others like him.
Can you repeat the beginning of that again?
What attributes to nurture for success? So what attributes are necessary, I guess, to nurture success in an AI-based company?
I would say starting right away without this ivory tower mentality. So talking, communicating, share, like understanding how your team is going to work, how that might affect work with other teams. This is something that I did not do early on when I joined here. I'm just starting to do it now. And I think you just, like, this is what I meant when I said, like, bring people along on the journey. So start having these conversations, start like talking about the challenges and the difficulties from the very beginning. What else? Just having this mindset of being okay with failure and trying things out, not trying to develop the perfect solution, just doing things that are not the final solution, just going for it.
Cool. I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I guess it doesn't hurt to reiterate. What are some of the AI specific metrics that you mentioned earlier, or that you work with in general, I guess?
That depends on the model entirely, and I can't get super into detail there, but for example, some of the models that we're building, we measure RMSE, root mean squared error. That's like a really classic one. But it depends. Not only, what we've learned also is that it doesn't just depend on the model, it also depends on the use case. And yeah, I'm not gonna go down that path, but you just have to assess it based on how you're actually solving the problem.
Cool. Okay. Do you have any initial heuristic, or an initial heuristic for estimating the value that machine learning can provide to a problem prior to exploring it?
I don't have a nice formula. I have some questions that I always ask. One of the first ones is there a solution out on the market? Like, what we have found in the problem space in micromobility is that there are a lot of solutions out there on the market, and these are people who have a whole company who's been working on solving this problem for 2 years. It's not always better to build it yourself. Just generally speaking, I think the gold is in the complex interactions between things, not in the model that you build. In our case, like predicting where people want to ride scooters. That's not where the value is. The value is in how do we connect that to other products? Like, how do we build the AI product around that? So if it's going to take you a couple of years to hone a model to predict that thing, that's time you could be spending on the business specific aspects of that problem. So yeah, really consider that question. And what else? I think just thinking about the risks, it's a pretty simple question in product management. Like, what are the risks? I think it's really valuable when it comes to AI products. And that goes from things like the data itself. I mean, do you have the data, what you need? How easy is it going to be to get that all the way to the end-to-end product as well? Like, yeah, do we need this to be super accurate because we are, we're potentially putting people's lives in danger if we're not accurate. So I would say evaluating the risks. That I also tried one technique once, which I liked, which is just kind of like mapping things out in terms of either risk and impact or complexity and impact, however you want to do it, but not just taking that map at face value, but then connecting the things in that map. It might help you see that, like, if you do this thing first, you're setting yourself up for being able to do these other things as well. It's easy to think, well, we should start with this because it's easier, but you might, if you look at it in a different way, you might see, actually, no, we should start with that because it's going to enable us to do these other use cases as well. So long answer, no heuristic, but just some questions that I consider very deeply.
Cool. This is a stakeholder management question. You mentioned taking them along on the journey, but in hindsight, how would you improve on your stakeholder management?
Good question. I don't know. I think it's just, I would have tried to explain what I shared with you tonight early on in the journey. I didn't do that. I just tried to act like another product team. I just assumed that that's what everyone would understand, and that's what I'm going to do. So I think I would have, in hindsight, I would have, tried to explain these things better and provide examples. As I said, I didn't know a lot of these things, so I couldn't have in hindsight. I had to learn them for myself, convince myself that, these are challenging things that are worth talking about and being mentioned. But that's what I think I would do differently.
Can I ask a little bit of a follow-up there, specific to, like, right along with that? How long did it take for the stakeholders in your organization to start seeing and realizing the values and the caveats that you kind of, walked through in your presentation?
I mean, there's an assumption in your question, which is that they do understand these things. We're still working on it. I mean, I think it's happening. It is happening slowly, and it's interesting because I notice it in some stakeholders who are actually working with third-party AI solution providers. And I've learned a lot from observing those types of interactions. These companies are trying so hard to prove themselves that it's worth it for you to invest in them, and they're willing to do anything for free, basically, to like show you that their product is worth buying. And watching that happen and watching the stakeholders who are going along on that journey, they have started to understand. Like, there are times when they're talking to me and they say, like, well, when we tried that with them, this is what happened, so we need to make sure that this is not going to happen this time. So that's, it's happening, but it's happening slowly.
Did you ever have the opposite thing happen where some of the stakeholders went through like the hype cycle themselves, where they had like a lot of inflated expectations and then like they had to be brought back to earth with something that didn't really work out so well after a big investment?
Yeah, definitely. For sure. And there are so many reasons in that case why that thing didn't work out. So that one of the examples that I gave in the talk was when we wanted to incentivize our users to park in places where we needed more scooters. There were so many there's no one reason why that didn't work. There are so many reasons. And this was, I don't think, like in the middle of last year when we tried that out for the first time. So like about 6 months ago. I still have people coming to me yesterday saying, like, why didn't that work? Like, I thought we had that everywhere now. Why don't we? So it happens. It happens all the time.
Here's the Confluence page on all the 60 reasons it didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, people don't want to hear that, right? Or they don't want to. Yeah, so it's also about finding a simple way and simple examples and talking to them about this at the right time. I've made the mistake also of, sometimes sharing too much information to try to make my case, and it's just not the right moment because that's not the thing that they care about in that moment. It's just classic stakeholder management.
Yeah, right sizing those communications is a challenge for sure. Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of stakeholders, the next question, considering the high level of uncertainty and the possibility that AI projects might work out, how do you get the initial buy-in, and how do you keep people engaged?
Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, it's interesting when you are your own team, because so in our case, we didn't really have to get buy-in at first because we could just try things on our own, right? No one was coming to us and expecting us to deliver a complete solution to something. We could just start with the problems that we wanted to, and then it was, then it's about us convincing them to give us the buy-in. And to do that, we needed to also get other teams on board, and we couldn't always do that. So we didn't always get the buy-in, and we just, I don't know, we just keep trying to prove ourselves, and we're hoping that as we work with more closely with other teams, that this will be an easier way to try things out and to show that what we're doing can have an impact.
And I think this will probably be the last question, unless maybe there's like one more last one. But Layla says she sees a lot of organizations not hiring PMs for data science or AI teams. Instead, a data science manager takes on this role. What do you see are the biggest downfalls of not having a PM for data teams?
I think the biggest downfall, so what is the PM and what is the data science manager? These things mean different things at every organization where you are. So maybe you have a data science manager who is very product oriented, and that works out really well. But that's where I see the biggest pitfall, is that a traditional engineering manager or data science manager maybe is more focused on the tech than on the product side. And that, I think, leads to this 80% of data science projects that don't get used in production, because they're worked on because the goal is to predict something or to build a model to do something, not to actually solve the user-facing problem. So that's the biggest, I think that's the biggest pitfall there.
Sounds like one of these typical nightmare scenarios you hear about engineering-driven organizations. But anyway, I think if there's no more final questions, this will we'll probably wrap it up. Unfortunately, or kind of also fortunately, these are all great questions. We won't have time for networking today, but yeah, thank you for everyone for coming. Let me just share this really quickly. Thanks everyone for coming, for interacting and engaging and asking great questions. Thank you again, Sadie, for a really interesting presentation and the insightful answers you gave. We encourage everyone to stay in touch, stay connected, join us, at Meetup, Part of People. We have a Telegram channel. We do these talks almost every Tuesday. So thanks again for coming, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. We'll end up the live right now.
Bye.